Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. I'm emeritus now. I'm retired, and then you can say, well, academics never retire, but it's unfortunately the case. I don't get a merit raise by doing any more publications or speaking for my Social Security, so that is doesn't matter. If you have a passion for things that you do, that should matter. And I don't think that Hillary Clinton has ever given a free speech in front of bankers, unless it's at least with $200,000. I'm not going to be charging anybody anything of that nature. You want to post it? Yeah. So I will obviously provide some lividity here as well. The book is down below, the second volume that has just come out, Treasures of Faith. And I think that's a very appropriate title because these are of the objects used in the Divine Liturgy that have, I think, a lot more piety to them than those people that donated the money for the building of churches in Istanbul or Constantinople. For whatever reason, in terms of human ego, we're more concerned about having our names on buildings than leaving an inscription on something that has more value, especially in the celebration of one's religious culture. What we're going to be looking at tonight are a series of metal objects that grace the Armenian churches, including the Patriarchal Church and the Holy Mother of God Cathedral. Some of the pieces did migrate from other churches, and so we were able to actually show that pieces did not just stay specifically within one community, but eventually did find their way to the Armenian Orthodox or Apostolic depots at the Patriarchate in Istanbul and Constantinople. So one of my favorite pieces here, an iron vessel. The workmanship on many of these pieces make them one-of-a-kind objects of art themselves. Most of them are gold and silver or are gilded in gold over silver. So they do have very high value just based upon the precious metals and the precious stones. Volume 2 includes a CD catalog in the back, so we did try to also do something that was a little bit more revolutionary in the general publication of an art historical book. That is to put the catalog, which would have been another 137 pages, on a disc so individuals that wanted to examine a specific piece in more detail could enlarge that on their computer screen. Volume 2 includes a CD catalog of objects, over 400 pages of text, and approximately 150 color plates. For those that are interested, you can contact me, and there's the email address at the bottom line right there. Chitlenbeck in Istanbul, and those are the two emails there. Also, Amazon.com certainly has the first volume, as well as the distributor of Chitlenbeck, and that is at Nettleberry. Okay, that is the USA affiliate. And yes, for whatever reason, the books that are being sent out from Istanbul seem to be having their corners bent and everything, and all I can say is that has been caused by the people that are doing the packaging. And I just hope that doesn't dissuade you from not seriously considering owning either or both volumes. The second volume especially has a tremendous amount of information about the Armenian community of Constantinople, which by around the turn of the 20th century, 1900, may have made up as much as 1/3 of the total population of Constantinople, at that time listed between 900,000 and 1 million people. So it was a substantial population with a substantial heritage. And the community, well, those Istanbuls of Armenian heritage, they loved the city as if it was their own. And they contributed immensely with their talents and energy to not only the glorification of Armenian Orthodox Apostolic tradition, but also of the community and the city itself. Now, reasons for the production of religious art there's a myriad assortment of reasons why. Personal piety, quite obviously. How do you participate in the Divine Liturgy? It's through the objects that you donate as gifts to God, because they are going to be consecrated with holy oil. For the church, while it was a form of investment, number 3 on the list, family prestige and social standing in the community were enriched by the donation of precious objects. And many of the inscriptions on the metal pieces Well, this comes from what is called the Amira class. This is the Armenian elites of the 19th century. And many of these people were carried away by their donations. That I, with my wife, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, now asleep in Christ, have donated this object covered with gemstones. It's a litany of grandeur for themselves, sort of losing sight of the fact that the piece is donated to the worship of God. Okay? Contributions from one's own hand and of oneself instilled within the maker a sense of personal fulfillment and involvement in the spiritual life of the community. Obviously a deep attachment to Armenian secular and religious values. Okay? And finally, adherence to Christian beliefs in an otherwise Muslim world. In this manner, the objects produced by the community became symbols of faith and dedication to a Christian religious culture. Number 4 on the list, continuity of Christian culture, the heritage between the living and the dead community, because these pieces were used throughout their entire existence to the present day. Some pieces date into the 1700s. One of the textiles is probably, that I'll be talking about tomorrow, is maybe right around 1600. The oldest dated one is 1680, and they were still being used during the celebration of the Mass. Okay. So there is a continuity of Christian culture in order to form one continuous apostolic community. And certainly other reasons can be added, but it's likely that these are the primary reasons: piety, social status, and the importance of the individual as the donator added to their importance in the community. You know almost nothing about those people who made the objects, the artisans, or in the domestic context, the women who produced the vestments and the textiles. Not until the 19th century were organized embroidery schools founded because of the grand proliferation of Armenian communities in the context of Constantinople. Private donations could not satisfy the need for religious cloth. And you all know, more so than I, certainly what I know in terms of Armenian Christianity and also as an Italian in the Latin Rite, there are so many feast days that demand different types of apparel and imagery in the celebration of a specific feast day. So there was always a necessity to produce sacred cloth or objects of metal. Religious culture, only one part of an extensive inventory that defines human culture in general, does not develop in a vacuum. It is contextualized. And then to use a quote, the arts are the fingerprint of a nation left behind throughout the ages for others to examine, admire, and learn. It's a window through which the soul of a nation is portrayed. It's a reflection of its culture during triumph, defeat, joy, and sorrow. Obviously, one of the most celebrated forms of Armenian art is in the illuminated manuscript tradition, which is markedly different than those in the Greek Orthodox tradition. The figures and the coloration and so forth, there's a sense of joy in terms of illuminating the stories within the Old and New Testament and the historical stories that focus around the history and the character of St. Gregory and others. But it is the palette, the color of the palette, that indicates a major break in the more somber expressions that we see within the sister Eastern Orthodox churches, especially with the Greek Orthodox tradition. As I was talking earlier to some of my colleagues that I've really enjoyed seeing again back here in the Los Angeles area, please remember this. Not only within Anatolia and Constantinople, but throughout the Middle East, the Armenian population of the diaspora was no small group. What kept them together, even though the phrase is used for another religious culture, was a book of words. It's the Old and the New Testament stories, the religious stories of St. Gregory and others, that became the architects of apostolic Orthodox Armenian Christianity. And they're scattered everywhere. Okay? Not only in Anatolia. The size here on this map does indicate basically population. I was just talking about, of all places, on Crete, there was a church dedicated to St. Garvin, in the heart of the Orthodox Greek world. And there's at least two major wings of the Ethnographic and Historical Museum in Heraklion, Greece, on Crete, that are dedicated to the Armenian community there. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was working on this project with my colleague for 15 plus years, I would never have realized that. It certainly dates back to the 15th or 16th century, if not earlier. And so we have certainly in Anatolia, in the area around Thessaloniki, down over here, above modern-day Greece, Macedonia, in Iran, Isfahan, and now also communities and the religious objects in those communities are found in the area of the Far East. So again, it was no small community, and certainly the diasporitic Armenian communities were extensive. They were also quite well-to-do, and they produced a variety of art forms that were eventually dedicated to either Echmiadzin or to their requisite patriarchal sees, primarily in Constantinople. Anatolia, areas of population density and migration. Many of the areas in the east have basically well-contained, in this area here, well-contained traditions, but that would have never merged to create a hybrid culture, except for the fact that after the Patriarchate was established in Constantinople, it drew that talent from the east, where all these regional styles were merged together. And it does create, by 1700, a very unique style that is instantaneously recognized as a product of Constantinople, the Constantinople style. The context of immigration can best be examined by the following. This is a quote. The 16th century was one of war between the Ottomans and the Safavids, and they fought over Armenia and the Caucasus. Successive campaigns of 3 to 12 years were usually followed by famine. The depletion of whatever resources may have been available on the Ottoman side of the shifting border led to general anarchy, further ravaging Anatolia and Armenia at the end of the 16th and first decade of the 17th century. This resulted in massive Armenian immigration to the cities of Cappadocia and further west to Constantinople, which, together with the forced transfer of Armenians by the Iranian Shah Abbas in the first years of the 17th century, caused a decline in the population in the Armenian homeland, in large areas of that homeland, of the historic homeland attested to by the colophones. But there's a positive part to this negative as well. On the positive side is the fact that such migration infused the city of Constantinople with a new impulse of talent that would make remarkable strides in the following centuries. Now, when Constantinople becomes a patriarchal see, it did not have universal authority over the other patriarchal sees that existed in Anatolia and elsewhere. You saw the breakdown, right? The beginning of the Armenian community in Constantinople, we don't know exactly when it begins, but there's no question that there were Armenian clerics in the scriptoria in Constantinople in the 4th and 5th century. There is no question that even though the Armenian clergy, that is, those that held the authority, were in Constantinople during the conclave at Chalcedon. And it's very likely that lower echelon clerics did indeed participate, but not with official recognition. So they certainly go back to the 4th century or 5th century for certain. The Macedonian dynasty was Armenian in nature. And during the time of the Macedonian dynasty, 25% of the Byzantine army was Armenian. And you're going to say, what happened to them? They became Byzantine, that's all. They adopted the dominant material culture in order to progress in the social and political life of the city and the state. They simply became Byzantine. But we cannot deny the fact that they were there. Okay? An examination of the early post-conquest history of Constantinople through sources demonstrates there is no evidence that Sultan Mehmet okay, tried to balance the Armenians against the Greeks, though it's very likely that was the reason why the Patriarchate was established there. This is conjecture and can be based on similar treatment of playing off rival groups during other epochs or periods. The first census taken by the Ottomans in 1478 indicates that the number of Armenians in Constantinople did not exceed more than 1,000 households. That would be about 5,000 or 6,000 souls or people in both the city proper and in Galata, the former Italian suburb across the Golden Horn. The census of the shops in Constantinople and Galata, conducted by the mayor and the police chief of the city, of Armenian origin, while it was small. 5,000 or 6,000 Armenians was not a great number among a population estimated about 100,000. But their presence is certainly well established. It was in fact the smallest among the groups listed: 9,500 Muslim households, 57,000 individuals, 3,750 Greek households, or 22,500 Greeks, and approximately 1,650 Jewish households, or approximately just around 10,000 people. The census figures of 1478 show that the great majority of the new settlers, whether forced or voluntary, was in fact Muslim. A quarter of a century later, shortly after 1500, again by the Ottoman censuses, Armenian households represented about 1/4 that of the Greeks. The situation remained much about the same, a very stable environment, until the end of the 16th century, when there was a wave of Armenian immigrants fleeing the Ottoman-Persian Wars. The question of the Armenian Patriarchate of Constantinople is as well very complex. It did not have universal authority. It eventually will, and it's the only of the external patriarchates that was recognized by the Ottoman authorities, which gave the patriarch as the Millet Bashi, the head of the entire Armenian millet or nation. The Greek Patriarchate was not established by Mehmet. It had existed since the time of Constantine. The chief rabbi, who had been encouraged to migrate to the capital from Spain, was appointed in 1454, but only as the spiritual leader of the Jews of Constantinople. So again, a lot of the artifacts are all wrapped up into the general historical commentary that we have today. Now, Anatolia, especially that part of Anatolia that makes up the Western Armenian cultural tradition, as well as the East, were filled with regional styles and embroidery and silverwork, everything of this nature. And they would have remained as such as an artistic achievement, but their grandeur is when these people migrate to the larger cities, especially Constantinople, where the styles are fused together into a new art form. In fact, this is one thing that we were able to do with the textiles as well as with the metalwork. The term was actually coined initially by Dikran Komijian, who used to be at Cal State Fresno, who's now retired. But there was no substantive proof about this unique style. It's the work that we started that basically took his commentary and started to give it substance. Widespread distribution of Armenian Orthodox churches in proximate neighborhoods. There were 55 churches right around 1900 in Constantinople of the Orthodox Apostolic tradition. And if we count the Protestant Armenian and the Catholic Armenian, 72 churches with central patriarchates, not only at Kumkapi, but also in the Galatasaray area for the Roman Catholic Armenians. Each neighborhood had its own aristocracy, the decision makers on the board of directors for each of the churches. These were, many respects, these were dominated by the Armenian aristocracy, the Emira class, who chose the patriarch. Okay? These were very powerful people and families. Much of the Ottoman manufacturing that we have in this, quote, early modern period was substantially late to the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. What the Ottomans inherited from the Byzantine counterparts was a guild or collegiate system of manufacturing, already in steep decline in the 15th century. To make matters worse, up until the late 18th century and early 19th century, the Ottomans had no coherent monetary policy. to further the process of industrialization. This leads to the calling in of religious objects that were encased in gold and silver and the destruction of the religious material from the various churches in the city, both Greek Orthodox as well as Armenian Orthodox. Added to this, their lack of relations with the Western European states and their lack of extensive populations for our labor force, the Ottoman state possessed less than 25 million people. A substantial number of that population, by the way, are going to be Armenian. This hindered their advancement. Much of the entrepreneurial processes that shaped the Western world were in the hands of the governed millet layer, Greeks, and after the Greek War of Independence, 1823, Armenians. They were in very sensitive industries, gunpowder, in the shipyards, ironworks, the manufacturing of artillery pieces, the treasury especially, they took over the organization of the treasury for the Jewish population that kept their records in Hebrew, and those that succeeded in the late 18th and early through the 19th century, the records of the Ottoman treasury were in Armenian, not Osmanli or Ottoman Turkish. So they were a vital grouping of people for the survivability of the Ottoman state. Also, their European associations and financial wealth made the Armenian millet or nation an indispensable group in the process of modernization of the Ottoman economy of the 19th century. We talked about that last night in terms of the dress of the Ottoman sultans and the proliferation of European and French style. We'll see that in the embroideries tomorrow. Ottoman labor issues, they never used slavery to fill the void, but rather the sürgün, forced labor. And we have some pieces that actually indicate the forced labor of Armenian boys that were gathered up, collected, and sent to Istanbul. Because in one of the churches, there was a dedicatory inscription on an altarpiece dedicated to the boys of Constantinople. They were detached, consciously, physically detached from their place of origin and their culture. Okay? Those who were recognized for their talents in handicrafts and industry, these individuals were free from military conscription and fared better than their Turkish counterparts who were subject to extensive military duty. In rural areas, the vast majority of subjects, free labor, peasantry, they were basically agrarian workers. Now, Armenian artisanship is expressed in metalwork and a variety of other things. We're focusing on the metalwork today. We'll get there very, very shortly. A society where piety went hand in hand with a love of luxury and display, and men sought insurance for the welfare of their souls in eternity by lavish gifts to churches on earth. Basically, we could say bribery. Okay? That is to bribe God to forgive you of your sins. Unlike illuminated manuscripts, which were produced typically for the church and the privileged society, metal objects were purchased for household use as well as for ceremonial use. Social hierarchies that underwrote much of the material splendor of the Armenian church, that is, those that were patrons of the arts, commissioned metalwork of sumptuous materials bearing subjects specified by the client. The wealthy middle class bought objects of equally pressed material, while those of lesser means purchased works usually mass-produced and made of base metals. In this manner, domestic as well as ceremonial needs sustained the artisan class of the Armenian community, with the church being the largest institution requiring specific items for liturgical use and display. As indicated earlier, donations to the church often are also reflected a deeper social psychology centering on issues of piety and personal salvation that affected the entire community, clergy as well as laity. From the wealthy to the destitute, individuals, families, and groups offered objects to the church. Art and craft blended together to form a unique collection of objects. Some were exceptional due to their simplicity and elegance in form and manufacturing technique, while others were one-of-a-kind objects of art and displayed originality and technical skill. It is in the latter category that experiment took place. New styles obviously come into existence, new styles of decoration based upon external influence. This idea of constantly renovating this emerging Constantinople style. It was refreshed constantly. And the artisan class were very receptive to produce something new and different and beautiful. This is the radiance I was talking about. This holy radiance is a memory of the boys who are in Istanbul, probably working in the galley yards or in the shipyards in the Golden Horn, in Esteni, for the enjoyment of Everett, Kayseri, St. Toros, St. Theodore's Church. Janissary Corps did not accept Armenians until much later in its own history. These were originally, as you know, former Christian captives. The Corps obtained new recruits through the periodic collection of young Christians recruited by an annual levy of young boys from Bosnia, Greece, Bulgaria, and eventually from Armenia. And that begins in the 17th century. And this, I feel, is one of the very few examples where we have a physical object with an inscription that actually confirms the surgun, the collecting of children as a head tax by the state. Other relics are a combination of old and new, an older altar decoration or jajamp shaped as a fan, and then the newer one that has more of the rococo rococo in European style. That's better. But the imagery, again, the crucifixion is in the center, the evangelist on the outside of this one, and we have their symbols in the four corners of the cross there. Okay? The ones that I've chosen here are important because of the inscriptions, not just because of the artwork. The common man basically donated. This holy cross is in memory of Usta. Well, that means like a foreman, okay? He's a working class person. Usta Gazar's wife, Tiruri, at the gate of the Holy Cross Church in Uskadar, 1229-1780. It's one of the older pieces that we did have in the collection. Uskadar, by the way, the Church of the Holy Cross, was the richest of all the Armenian congregations in the city. This is where the greatest of all the Armenian emirs, Harutian Bejian, that was his home church. But he dedicated objects, as one of the very few of the emira class did, that objects of faith, and used in the divine liturgy. He donated to not only the Holy Mother of God Cathedral in Kumkapi, but also to other churches. He was the most influential of all the Armenian emirs of the 19th century. The Ottoman Sultan and the Sultana stayed in his dwellings for 4 days. When Harutian was sick, the Ottoman Sultan sent his personal court physician. The relationships with the emir class of the Armenian elite, more often than not, were very positive. And because of that prestige, they held sway over the Armenian millet and over the choosing of the patriarch. In the simplicity of the design, this is one of my favorites. In this holy reliquary are the beneficent relics of the saints, the Apostle Thaddeus, Herpsine, and then the Patriarch Aristake. They are intercessors before the Lord. May the Lord be reconciled with me, a sinner, on the day of great judgment. I, sinful Elena, am the daughter of Oscan. O holy children of holy Zion, O clerics, pray for mercy at the feet of the saints for my sinful self. For my parents, Oscan and Sultan Pasha, my brothers and my wife, and my entire family, and you shall receive what you seek in the year 1745, as a reliquary. It's always important to have some relic from a historical person that altered the direction of their community or of their civilization. Here we have one that was dedicated after his death to Hovannes Golad, who was the one person that was instrumental in the Second Armenian Renaissance in the production of religious art. And this was given to him by the papal legate from Rome. This holy sign of the cross was granted by Cardinal Pedluque, Luis Antonio Beluga, to the late patriarch Hovhannes Vardapet, and was ornamented with gems and gold by Patriarch Hagop, a memorial to St. James, which is in Jerusalem in the year 1743. Hovhannes IX died in 1741. Now, I'm not going to do the enlargement because we'd have to change the program and so forth, but in this corner here where the area is, and in this corner here, the cameo was produced, and the letters are Greek. Okay. I can only make out the one here, Theoi, and probably is Theotokos, Mother of God. Okay. The description is a little bit, it's very difficult here in terms of the abbreviation. But all of the rest is in the Armenian script. Okay? We usually think of religious objects as made of gold, primarily of gold, and usually in the form of crosses. The archbishops and the patriarchs could wear no more than 3 crosses, and these were usually exceptional pieces overall, and these are a couple of examples of the goldsmith's work from the 19th century, mid-19th century. Then we get vestries as altar ornamentation. This vestry is in memory of the soul of the late Minas Amira, again the Amira class is the aristocracy, of the village, and there it is, of Akin, so it's in the region of Erzincan, Erzurum in Eastern Anatolia, and his wife Anna, who is alive, and they're living in the sleep, family members, at the gate of the Holy Archangels in Balat, 1787. Balat, which is along the Golden Horn, on the old city side, had a mixed population of Jews, as well as Greek Orthodox and Armenian Orthodox. Not many in terms of Ottoman Muslims. Going from the different congregations, which are extensive in Constantinople around 1900, another way to determine the overall density of population in regions are by occupation. And again, the size indicates the population. Patriarchate is here. This is the region of Kumkapi, Yenikapi, and then Bakir Koy, Uskadar. In Kumkapi alone, over 33 separate silversmiths are known. These are families, not individuals. And the families had individuals that specialized in certain parts of the production of donated objects. There were the inscribers, there were those that made the metal wire, which you see on this textile down below. That was an Armenian monopoly. They also produced gold and silver plate for secular use, as well as religious use. Okay? And so they gained commissions. Some of these silversmiths also gained commissions for the Ottoman Sultan. In fact, the silver door handles into the great audience hall at Dolmabahce were cast by, and we only know by his first name, Old Hagop, that made the silver handles for the glass doors into the audience hall of Dolmabahce. That was built by Garbed Balian, the chief court architect of the Ottoman Sultan. So their workmanship was recognized universally, not just amongst Christian communities, but also non. And here I broke it down in terms of the different directions. 33 silversmiths, including gilders and then other parts, other items within the jeweler's trade. These are families, and they were extended families. Many of them came from the region around Erzurum generations earlier, when they migrated, certainly to Constantinople after the Turkish-Persian wars devastated the region, the one that I read the quote from Professor Luigi. Now, why don't we have tens of thousands of pieces of religious art? Very simple. And that's why we had some of the text in the early part to put into context. The Ottomans had no coherent monetary policy. None. When there were times of financial stress, the Sultan issued edicta to the general population, everybody. He also issued mandates to the recognized leaders of the millet layer, the millet bashi of the Greeks and the Armenians and the Syriacs, everybody else. Twofold. Each church was assigned a certain amount of gold and silver to contribute as a donation to meet war expenses. In the 18th century, the wars against the Tsarist armies were expensive. The church at Uskadar, that's just one church, Surapach, Holy Cross, was required to donate 6,000 kilos of gold and silver. Where did it come from? It came from the encasement of the relics as reliquaries. What you see here, this is a sort of a sanitized view. These are the relics that were taken out of their reliquaries. The reliquaries contained all the important information about the community, the church, and who did the donation. All gone. This image is very sanitary because Archbishop Aram, a Teshman, was trying to organize the relics. One day when I was at the Patriarchate, we were there to see him, and we walked by a room that was, it was about 20 by 30 feet, scattered everywhere, on ottomans, on couches, on the floor, and on tables. Vast array of relics, of bone and wood and other things, in little packets. I didn't get a chance to take a photograph. The prevailing view of the congregation of the churches was this. The reliquary encasements were given. The relics were saved, because what is more important? Is it the relic or the encasement? Right? It's the relic. But there was a belief that when times got better, they would be able to have them replaced with new reliquaries, and the relics would find their appropriate station within the reliquary. It didn't happen. In some cases it does, and so we get an idea that the style in the artistic representations was constantly being refreshed to the new standard of that present day, but it was not the original from the previous period. The other point is, as the community grew, there was a greater necessity to have vestments, and so a school was established for embroidery in the 1830s, underwritten by Aruti and Bejian, even though that was a tradition of Armenian women's work in the domestic household. But there was a need. And then finally, the final point to add, from 1453 to 1900, Istanbul suffered 73 devastating fires that carried away private archives, public archives, religious archives, and the artistic achievements of the generations that have made contributions. If you do the math, 500 years, 73 fires, the vast majority of the Armenian churches and other buildings were wood. The Armenian millet only was given the opportunity, they had to seek via Ferman permission from the Ottoman Sultan to build the church, or rebuild the church in stone. And that's what we see today for those that have gone to Istanbul. You see the 19th century churches in stone, replacing wooden churches that constantly had burned with their reliquaries and their movable artistic work. And this was permission either granted by or refused by the Ottoman Sultan. By the way, almost all the churches are done in the federal style or the neoclassical style of the 19th century, barrel vaulted basilicas with wonderful pastel colors, graced with Corinthian columns, again, not an Armenian tradition. But this is only the reliquaries and the relics that were involved in the destruction of the objects based upon very bad monetary policy. Okay? And you can see the names and so forth. Some of them are blank because they have no idea where they came from. Others tend to, as I said, reflect the prevailing style. This is done in the first French imperial style. And at the bottom we have the symbol for silver. We have a date, 1845, the Ottoman Sultan's Torah, and then assayers' marks. The Ottomans regulated church collections religiously because it was important for their financial well-being. And so many pieces, we have numerous Ottoman Torahs. Okay? It guaranteed the quality of 925 silver and gold gilt. The objects are unbelievably numerous. Fans, they could be either on pedestals as altar ornamentations or carried in procession. Okay? Now, it's in the center of the processions, of these processional fans, that we find the motifs. Okay? Here we see, obviously, scenes from the Passion of Christ. But notice this little point here. This is in one of the Stations of the Cross. I think it's number 6 in the Catholic Rite, where Veronica comes and wipes the face of Jesus, and he leaves his imprint. Now look, why did the artisan do the extra work here in the engraving? If you're 2 to 3 feet away, you can't see it. The artisan does it because you have to be absolutely honest to the biblical passage. That's the reason why. You don't offer schlep to God. Okay? And so in these things, this is one of my favorite photographs that I did, Christ looking back at his own image. When you look at the details, you really are carried away by the power of religious belief. One of my favorites from a miter. Detail silk and metal, secondary background, secondary element of the resurrection. Facial image is less than 1 inch. It's about the size of your thumbnail. Note the various embroidery techniques in metal. And you can see it. The face is silk. It stands about 1 centimeter off of the surface. One of the things that stands out in the Constantinople style of the embroidery tradition is the construction of 3-dimensional artwork. And this is a more difficult methodology than creating 3-dimensional imagery in pigment, because all you do is change the shading to create the image of depth. This has depth. It is 3-dimensional in its own right. And then with the various weaving techniques, remember I talked to you about the different styles merging together? All of this. Some of this is Marash in nature. That was known from the Karaman Marash community of Armenians. But it all comes together because you want to break up the background. You don't want it solid. And if you were an illuminator in a scriptorium, you would do that with paint, with pigment. This is a much harder technique in cloth, needle, and thread. The image of the face, by the way, is silk. Layered upon layer of silk. And if you notice, the pupils of the eyes, notice the cheeks here, they've been embossed. And that also gives dimensionality to the image. And this is a secondary part of the primary composition. It's one of my favorites. We talked about separate objects of art. The chalice is a special, the cup of life. This comes from, quite obviously, Üsküdar. Very rich. Had at least 11 separate families involved in the jewelry trade. But in the composition we have both horizontal, from the cup to the stem to the base, as well as vertical. Very unusual. And in terms of the vertical imagery, the horizontal imagery is part of the Passion. The upper imagery includes, right then at the top, we have the Trinity of the Holy Spirit, God the Father, and God the Son. But if you go vertically, each one represents what's at the cup, within the cup of life. So you get compositional symmetry here as well as here. It's dated to around 1790 from Muscadar. And then the separate parts of the base. A despondent Christ. There's no great, I want to spend a little time on that, so please bear with me. I know I talk too much and it's an occupational hazard. But the despondency of Christ's face just carries you away when you look at it, of what he knows is to come. The scourging, the crucifixion, which are not exactly pleasant things. And then here, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the sleeping apostles. My God, you couldn't even stay awake while I go to pray. Okay, but here's something that's very fascinating. The apostles were human, and they showed the human frailty. Peter, by far, is my favorite saint, because he's the most human. He denies Christ. He's told he's going to do it. He's the second person to walk on water. People don't realize that until he loses faith, and boom, starts going down. Okay? Because he is the most human. We can relate to that human frailty of stumbling. But the image here is, it will capture from your soul the level of sadness that will take place. There's a wonderful example again. Again, this is all in these are items that are in the book itself. At the base, the only place we saw this motif, the chalice is the cup of life, right? The drink of salvation. And here we get an Old Testament type of imagery from the heart of Christ, the Sacred Heart. Again, that's more of a Latin tradition. Flows the blood of life into the vat of grapes. More often than not, this is usually associated with Abraham in terms of the imagery from the Old Testament. And there's a wonderful passage on that. It was the only example we found in gold and in enamel in the entire collection that we saw. So there was uniqueness in relation to the artisanship. We get altar reliquaries, then again, as I said, done in more of a European style. Brilliant pieces of silverwork. Censers to hold the incense, as well as you can see the candle holder here. In fact, this piece was duplicated while we were in Istanbul last year by some of the Armenian artisans. The acting patriarch, Aramateshin, brought one of the objects to a well-known Armenian silversmith, and he made 2 exact copies. And they're brilliant. It's one of my favorite pieces because, again, it shows Armenian architectural standards, number 1. And number 2, the workmanship in gilding and silverwork is second to none. Here is our Myron vessel. Very rare. Now, the Myron vessel is not rare in terms of holding the sacred chrism oil, the holy oil, every 7 years for blessing and so forth. But it was in the depiction at the base. It's Pentecost. We only have found 2 examples that show Pentecost. Only 2. And besides the Holy Spirit, in terms of the workmanship, superb, it was at the base where all of the images, when the Holy Spirit visits those Pentecost, afraid of what's happening and all that, including the Mother of God, and tongues of fire, and all this. All the faces, by the way, of the apostles are different. They're not standardized, they're different. So it makes you wonder, did they draw from maybe the people of the laity in the community? Who knows? But the artisan created something that was indeed more than just a vessel for holy oil. Okay? And they're captured in different poses as they start to speak multiple languages, being honest to the biblical text. Again, one of my favorites, this is a chop, an ornament. And this comes from the Church of the Holy Resurrection, the Fisherman's Church. Now, what would you expect to see that the fishermen would donate to the Church of the Holy Resurrection in Kumkapi? A kayak, a small fishing boat that you still see today, that row out there sometimes in the Sea of Marmara. It's only that big. Only that big. And on the fish, on the other side, it says Aram of Istanbul, whoever he was, not Archbishop Aram. But it is a beautiful piece of the silversmith's craft. And in that manner, it makes it a one-of-a-kind piece as an ornament for the base of a chandelier. We get writing desks of a patriarch here, done in beautiful filigree work, which was an Armenian monopoly. And then we get this wonderful ornamentation here, by the way, in the inscriptions. Again, it's Greek. Shows Christ surrounded by diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, and rubies. And we were allowed to touch these objects. No, there was no temptation. I mean, we were really overwhelmed with the pure religiosity of the work. We have Vardapet staffs from the 19th century, made of silver, some of ebony, some of alabaster with the dragons here. Okay, beautiful workmanship. This is a symbol of the Vardapet. We have the bishop's staffs. We have mitres done in gold and silver on base cloth. The example here is more of a Greek Orthodox tradition, but this piece comes from Hungary. And no doubt probably had a tremendous amount of influence from the Greeks of Cappadocia. I can't remember the Greek name for the composition, but it's called the endearing embrace. That's how it translates more or less. This is not an Armenian motif. So this whole process of saying that these religious communities that were Christian were more or less separate and didn't borrow from each other, but it really wasn't the case. And yes, there was a difference between those pieces made in the 19th century in Eastern Anatolia, which were very conservative, in relation to those that were being made in Constantinople, which was the center point of the cosmopolitan world of the Ottoman court. Okay, so we get a wonderful comparison of the talents that take place throughout the Armenian diaspora of Anatolia. One of my favorite ones here is from Beşiktaş. Again, we get Pentecost with the Holy Spirit. And then here, God the Father, God the Son, and they're standing directly over St. Gregory in terms of the vakas, or column. It's all done in gold and silver. This is actually one of my favorite images. It's part of the unity of the Trinity of God the Father in the three separate pieces. Another Vardapet staff. This was a brilliant piece. On one side, the cross was illuminated in rubies, and the second half side, emeralds. We have alabaster here, enshrined and encased in gold and silver. There's the other side. Okay, it stands about this far, this tall. And it's the staff that is carried by the educators, the doctors within the church, the Vardapets. Here we have a bishop's staff, and even here, we have little small details. Here on the mitre being held by the saint, it's only about that big, is engraved the resurrected Christ. Altar processional standards, late 19th, early 20th century, a variety of items, all really unique. Again, one of my favorites, when we were at Holy Cross in Üsküdar, we were told of this piece by Bishop Aramatesyan, so they brought it out. And it was really a struggle for them to open up their depot so we could focus on specific objects. They were very, very, very afraid that the authorities would find out about what they had, even today. And so they had no idea who this was dedicated to. Okay? There's an inscription right there. And the guy started to read and he goes, it's Haruti and Bejian. It was dedicated to Haruti and Bejian in 1831. They had no knowledge of that in the church where it had stayed for generations. And now, all of a sudden, they had a direct attachment to the most important Ottoman Armenian in Constantinople in the 19th century, or of any century. We have, again, part of the paraphernalia, lamps and censers manufactured, donated in pairs, 19th century. Again, the silver work is second to none. We have deck stairs, which are arm reliquaries. Again, done in a very naturalistic style. St. Nicholas, St. Gregory are examples, always expressed in the blessing motif. Small little reliquaries that were used to hold hold incense. Some of my favorites, again, are these Eucharistic boxes. It's not Nelio work in the sense of engraving, but these are Eucharistic boxes that the clergy would then take to those parishioners who could not come to Mass due to illness, and he would give the communion to those that were invalids or sick. But these are very rare. We have ornamental stuff that is musical in nature, to ring the bells, again, to chase away the demon spirit. That's like the evil eye type of situation. We have water censers. We have things that are common also that were donated. A funnel. Well, a funnel is very important so you don't spill the holy oil after you've received the new batch that has been, has been blessed and that's beyond in. So the bottom inscription here in osmology says "Tikrit," fake. It's not silver. Okay? There was no assayer's mark, so the people that did this, they wanted to make certain that it wasn't going to be confiscated as a silver object, so they put on the bottom of the inscription, "Not real, hands off," this type of stuff. Okay, so we found that to be kind of interesting. One of our Armenian friends in the Bedestan in the Kabbalah Church, he said, "It says fake," okay? And I went, well, that's it. We have examples, the exact same examples of itself. The Myron bird is one of those favorite motifs that, though rarely appears, usually when they do the workmanship, it's very labor intensive in terms of number of revolvers to produce these items. We get ewers and basins for the washing of hands. This one is a very interesting one. It came from a Dirne in the west, and it had two inscriptions. And we can date the inscriptions by the same Ottoman Sultan, but since the earlier inscription was used, and especially in Dirne, the later inscription was only separated by about 5 years. So we were, this was a piece that migrated. And we found out, in many respects, that many pieces migrated. They didn't stay in the churches they were donated to. But what's interesting here, the entire motif is musical instruments. In fact, we were talking about this last night, in terms of Ottoman theater. The Armenians are the ones that started the theatrical tradition in Istanbul. They're the ones that built the opera house before 1850, 1848. And what we have here are a variety of objects that are used in Armenian music. We get the kachkars or crosses. They usually are reliquaries with a relic on the inside. Radiating sunburst here is a very common motif in Armenian art. Chalices, as I said, are almost always unique and one-of-a-kind types. The one to my left was the only type of this that we saw with the wheat and grapes, the bread and wine type of situation. Piece here on the right with angels holding up a cup of life. This one piece here was duplicated. The bigger of the two came from one church, the smaller one from the Church of the Holy Cross at Beşiktaş. The motif is exactly the same, except a little bit small. So obviously somebody from Beşiktaş saw an earlier piece made by the workshop, and they duplicated it for him. And here we have the birth of Christ, the creation of woman out of Adam's rib. These are all scenes from both the Old and the New Testament. Here we see that God the Father with his nimbus, again in gold. Eve, Adam asleep, usually the case. Here we have the baptism, and again St. John the Baptist here, Christ here, and the angels on the other side with the staff and banner. These are very intricate pieces, and yet the detail of the pieces you cannot tell. These fans are made in multiple pairs, either 2 or 4, sometimes 6, that denote the Passion of Christ, especially during Holy Week. But the detail work, unless you're right up next to them, if you're 5 to 10 feet away, you cannot see the detail work, and then the detail work is the second one. One of my favorite reliquaries, again, is this one here. It's done in the 19th Rococo style. Again, this is probably not the original. That was for the relic here in the upper section. So we do see a number of examples that can be dated stylistically based upon the European heritage. catch me as in from pilgrims from Constantinople. So I've tossed some of them, and some of them are very old. Some of them certainly go back to the 1500s, if not 1600s. Belt clasps, again for belts. This is woven gold here, and the filigree work here. Okay. Again, it's always good to have something from a historical figure that had importance. This is the belt clasp from John IX of Golan, and his favorite inscription, "Be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." That was one of his favorite quotes from the New Testament. Altar standards, altar crosses, and processional crosses done in enamel. This one here dates to in the 1780s. Many of these are probably older than what we initially fixed as a date, because there were no separate dates per se on them. It's very, very rare. Again, another altar ornamentation here. This is the mid-19th century, early 19th century. Our memorial gift from Bejion. Another one of the late 19th century, done in the Imperial French style #2. Okay, so it's dated right around 1890, if I remember correctly. This cross here, I saw representations of it in Crete under the Greek Orthodox artifacts. And so again, the give and take of reliquary crosses and hand crosses, this is the hand cross. Certainly the exchange of ideas, if not the exchange of gifts between the Christian communities. They were not separated out. Again, a processional cross that can also be used as a hand cross. These are standards on larger poles. The relic is on the inside on both of them, surrounded by emeralds and diamonds, rubies in this one, and emeralds. I said, again, there's a lot of physical wealth here. We also see it in more mundane things, like Eucharistic stamps, and also in ceramics. This is St. Theodore, not St. George killing the dragon. The older tradition is actually St. Theodore. Now, outside of just being pretty pictures, what do these objects provide us in the sociological context that they are part of? Colophones on a number of items in the collections offer unique insight into the level of piety expressed in the Armenian community, in both Istanbul and Anatolia. More importantly, when placed in their historical context, they provide additional information on the relationship between the Ottoman authorities and the Armenian Millet. The emergence of an Armenian oligarchic and entrepreneurial class, interaction between Armenian congregations in Istanbul and Anatolia, internal and external social identity, and levels of wealth and prestige attained by Armenian craftsmen and their patrons. What is interesting is the fact that most of the textile artifacts, they are gender specific to women. They feature almost no inscriptions. This may have been due to many factors, including modesty. Precious metal objects, however, possess a high percentage of names of men and families. No doubt piety and individual or collective social status were important. That is, social status more important. And let's look at some of these inscriptions. They're very interesting. "O celebrant holy priest, remember before the Lamb of God me in the person's name, who gave this memorial gift together with my daughters who are asleep in Christ," and then the names, "with her family in Herbst Day, 1286, 1837. Remember, Lord, the soul of Matessi, a pilgrim, and his name, and the soul of all those asleep in whose memory this chalice was placed at the gate of the holy archangels in Balat in the year of the Lord, 1814. Notice the date, January 16th, the date of the blessing of the waters, the feast of St. Basil in the Orthodox tradition. The date of the donations also is extremely important in terms of family prestige. This is a gift to Holy Theotokos Mother of God Church in memory of Matessi Sima and his wife Miriam and sons Asator and so forth, 1818. On a standard, this wonderful holy cross is the reliquary. Now this is where we get a little bit too much with the person. For the greater part of the little finger, the wonder working of the right hand of the Holy Forerunner, St. John the Precursor, is a memorial gift from the great prince, social status, Takis Amiru. And we know who this person was. He appears in the Ottoman documents. Son of the late Aslan, a benevolent and pious man, being native of Armenian, at present of Byzantium. He goes back to Byzantium, which is probably suspect. This virtuous great prince is the servant of the king for his parents who are at rest in Christ, and also for his wrongdoings he has deposited, now it's not what he's done, as a memorial gift, this consecrated Holy Cross together with the relics enclosed in it. Well, somewhere in all of this you lose sight of the piety factor. Okay? These Amiras bought and sold relics. They gave relics to fellow Amiras as wedding presents for their daughters, because it indicated the fact that they had the wealth, the power, and the prestige to do so. This altar reliquaries. The Holy Cross, the Tree of Life, is a gift to the Theotokos, Holy Mother of God Church, in Ortokoi, memory of the deceased Hoja Petros, a teacher of the village of Akin, that's in the Erzurum, Erzincan, and his wife Anna Hatun, and their son, okay, and his wife Miriam, and their sons, 1784. In memory of Topal, Lame, Kidir's son Minas, and blah blah, Petros, people of the same rank in the village of Sungulu, that's near Balıkesir, at the gate of the Holy Mother of God Church, 1824. Finally, the bottom one. This veil is in memory of Abram, Samuel, and others, and his father, this and the other people, blessed memory for father, so-and-so of 1813. So again, it's not uncommon that they would string together all of these people in terms of making one donation. Now, I did say that these relics had value. They had sociological value, social value, status value. This holy relic of the Venerable Wood of Life, Holy Cross, which Shahak Amira of Akin, again in the Erzurum, Erzincan area, Eastern Anatolia, received from the renowned Amira Hagok, is donated to the Holy Church of Beşiktaş. Now, and then he goes on, girded with gems and silver, it is bequeathed to the same church in memory of the soul of Miss Herpsina, daughter of Hovannes Amira, Tatiun, another person that is known from the Ottoman records, the royal superintendent of ammunition, in the year of the Seder, 1856. Great emphasis at this time is now being placed by the Emirs, who were under assault by the emerging middle class of the Armenian community that were going to revolutionize Armenian life in the late 19th century, the Armenian Constitution. One of my favorites on a gospel book. Opposite the iron post, so it's a specific location, at Kumkapi, urged by the barbarous customers, and being of the same mind with them, they gave this from the righteous earnings of all to the magnificent and wonderful St. Nicholas Church in Topkapi for the souls of the living and those asleep in Christ. Whichever of the officiating priests reads this holy gospel, we all beg him to remember all of us during the divine liturgy and before the immortal Lamb of Christ. This was written by the sinful and worthless deacon Thomas of Constantinople in the year 1833, March 10th, a memorial gift by Matesi Georg Aga for the longevity of his son Hago at the Holy Cross Church in Üsküdar. 1794 is another inscription. The one above is very tender because it's from the common folk, the righteous customers of the barber. Now, my favorite of inscriptions, and Maggie knows this one. Given to the Church of St. Gregory the Illuminator in Galata in memory of the souls of Father Marcos, the saintly priest, and his son Arakel Aga, who is asleep. Let those who buy or sell this be eliminated from the register of life. And those who enjoy using it remember before the Lord the souls who are asleep in Christ. The reason why it survived is because no one was going to take a chance of being removed from the register of life. That would be eternal damnation. So it survived. You know, it's just like saying, hands off, do someone else's. And they did. Religious artifacts are more than brilliant and pious works of art. They are more than pretty pictures. What can be gleaned from such artifacts is quite amazing and reinforce in physical form the transformations taking place in human society. Now, we looked at over 150 inscriptions, and we placed them against the Amira class who are known. There's 165 names mentioned in both the patriarchal records and in the Ottoman Defteres registries. And this is what we have. We have the Armenian oligarchy that dominated and controlled the patriarchate and elected the patriarch up until the revolution that begins in the 1850s. The Armenian Amira class before 1850, the Ottoman Divan or Ottoman court. And the eras go both ways. Recognized social status as empowered elites by serving the state. Ottomans recognized them. They represented the millet at the Ottoman court. Now let's go to another one. They were spokesmen for the patriarchate, and they chose the patriarch. Again, follow the arrows. Recognize their authority to rule their millet, that is, through the patriarch, and recognize the authority to govern the millet. So what you get from these inscriptions. So we get donations, church construction. That's what they primarily did. They like to have their names on buildings. Recognized authority and status. After 1850, the formation of an Armenian middle class that used the same titles as the older Amira class. They actually started to hijack the titles of the aristocracy. They were not recognized by the Ottoman authorities or the Armenian elite, but they were recognized by their local congregations. Personal donations made in the celebration of the Divine Liturgy. Their names appear on the objects, and they usurp the titles of the elite, though they do not appear in either the Ottoman Defteres or the patriarchal records as people of that status. They just usurp them. Well, what the heck? I got more money than he does, and so I'm going to call myself an Aga, or an Amira, or a Pasha. Now, from that material, even though it's a small amount in relation to the vast majority of inscriptions, I think that there's some good stuff here. 45% of objects were donated by those who made a pilgrimage. They were Matesi. And of these, 12% usurped the title of Aga and or Amira, but are not part of either patriarchal or Ottoman lists, and therefore are not recognized as such. But they call themselves that. And of that 12%, 23% held the title of Aga, while 19% held the title of Amira. Though they're not. Of the occupations listed, 11% were distinguished by the term teacher, or its variant, while less than 1% was for the trades. Goldsmith, printer, foreman, we talked about that yesterday, foreman, and ironsmith. It is interesting to note that only one individual was referenced as a saraf, or from the saraf law, bankers. Only 2 objects were donated on dates of religious significance, the 6th of January, 15th of August. Now, let's look at the artifactual data. We have our Ottoman elites here, our Armenian elites here, not recognized by the Armenian elite, and we have the Ottoman Divan, not recognized. That is the people that are usurping the titles that are not what they say they are. These are the local elites that use the same title as Amira or Aga, small merchants, tradesmen, jewelers, etc., not part of the official registry. They were important to their local congregations. They were recognized by their congregations, and they were instrumental in breaking the power of the old oligarchy. Donations on more personal basis and level. What we can see in the artifactual data is something unique. The internal and external stress, confrontation, and revolution that was going to transform the Constantinople community after 1850. Because people are usurping titles of those that held them to be sacred. There was a social and political restructuring based upon enlightened principles of self-rule and equality. Okay? I only have a few more, so just bear with me. The focus of the Armenian millet was the patriarchate, and it is this institution that the conservative Amira class controlled for over a century. Since Armenian national life, secular and religious, revolved around the patriarchate, the control of this institution meant control over the entire millet throughout Ottoman lands. its clerical representatives, control of the charitable agencies, education, and the general lives of the lay community. In many respects, through the selection of patriarchs and controlling the boards of local churches, the emirs were able to exercise their will in both secular and religious matters. This would eventually be challenged by the mid-19th century by Armenian intellectuals as well as the guilds of artisans, or esnafs. Armenian craftsmen and merchants were well organized. And at the end of the 18th century, 65 guilds existed within the Armenian community of Istanbul. By the first quarter of the 19th century, the esnafs, or esnaflar, with the merchants, or the tujars, began to challenge the position of the emir class and their control of the millet. A potent alliance of young Armenian intellectuals, artisan guilds, merchants, entrepreneurs, and industrialists, as well as the divisions and rivalries within the emir class itself, was created. The financial transformation of the Ottoman state, and finally the emergence of an Armenian national constitution, eventually curtailed the emir dominance over the patriarchate and the millet. In this manner, modernization processes affected this conservative elite, that we call them the Great Ottoman Armenians, and their ability to survive the structural changes taking place not only in the Ottoman state but also the Armenian millet. This is what these artifacts provide us with, besides wonderful imagery. Now, there was a response by this class after 1850 because they started to adopt different terms of status and recognition. We get this: superior in honor, honorable dignity, of princely race, noble ancestry, prince of great honor, bright prince, great prince, free-born man of noble ancestry, leader of the nation, of great honor, leaders of the nation, full of grace. And then the one that no one else possessed except Harutian Bejio, strengthened by Christ. Couldn't top that. Okay? And none of the other emirs even dared to put themselves in the same vein. Okay? Strengthened by Christ. He's the only one that uses that title. And so that would be a response to now the dissemination and the lessering of the social status of the old Amira, using Aga and Amira, because others, none of that class, had watered the status down. And so they come up with these titles. Okay? Now, there are still Armenian silversmiths that are the best that still exist today in this nation. This is one of them. He does commissions for the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in Fenerbahce, which only has about 2,000 people in all this stuff. St. George and the Dragon. Okay? If you notice, we gave him a copy of the second book, and he went through it and was just amazed. Wonderful man. This is Akhtamar Island. This was done for an Armenian, a local Armenian in Istanbul. And I think we're going to, well, that's the summation. Barsonian in the 1980s is the one that put together the list of the Armenian emirs. It was a brilliant piece of sociological research. He points out that the title of emir is associated with particular frequency with the honorific title of Aga. Many an emir was the son of an Aga. The use of multiple titles is not unusual amongst elite groups, since it is a method of compressing status and prestige and wealth into an ever-shrinking body of individuals and families with special rights. This combination of titles should be viewed as a method of redefining the Armenian social hierarchies of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries into higher levels of authority that, no doubt, increase the rivalries amongst the upper-tier Armenian elites and the lower-tier Armenian elites. Because these groups are very rarely unified in human history. They usually are competing for the same shrinking dignities and titles and status, usually within a much larger political entity or state. It also should be noted that many possessed a nomenclature that enhanced their character, as we had saw earlier: superior in honor, honorable dignity, of princely race, noble answer, prince of great honor, bright prince, great prince, freeborn, blah, 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 blah. Full of grace, and then, as I said, strengthened of Christ. Prestige was the driving force for many in this group to attain a recognized higher status amongst their rivals, and consequently a special place in high society. There are the two books. One is on the Splendor and Pageantry. That is available through Amazon.com. And I would check Nettleberry as well as Amazon.com for the second one. I don't have any more books. All of mine have been donated and given to museums and universities and so forth. Thank you very much, and may God bless. I apologize for the length, and unfortunately Maggie knows that, but when there is so much information, and especially to an audience of this nature, it is your culture that I have been blessed with the opportunity to honor. This was never, ever about us, my colleague Arlene Brew, or myself, though I think Archbishop Armenian really wants to take a lot of credit for all of this, and it wasn't about him either. It's about something much greater. And it appears in the liturgy during the prayers for remembrance of the deceased. The continuity from the past to the present to the future. It is about you, the community, your legacy, your heritage. We found in Istanbul so many people that were working in the churches as the custodians, men and women, who had no knowledge of what these pieces were or who made them. And to the women who toiled in the embroidery, I just told them straightforward. It was your ancestors that made them, your grandmothers and great-grandmothers, your uncles and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, who gave things not because they were required to do so. They did it as part of their belief system in a foreign land in which they were denied the basic rights that other nations and nationals enjoyed. They weren't second-class citizens because they weren't citizens. They were subjects. And the only way that they could break that bond of servitude was to donate things from their heart and soul that reconfirmed their religious belief in the sanctity of the human spirit. And the sister churches of the Armenian community and Roman Catholicism are very close because they are sister churches. And I was very impressed when in the broadcasting of the death of John Paul II that they did show an image of Mesron II entering into St. Peter's. Okay. The level of devotion that man had shown us really instilled us with a tremendous amount of respect. And I will say this in all honesty. This is the best writing I've ever done. Okay? And many people, in fact, it was so funny. Archbishop Aram brought 3 copies of the book to His Holiness Cardinal last June during an enclave. And we came a couple of days later. As we did the first one. Oh, okay. Okay. When we had a private audience with His Holiness, he made available 45 minutes during the enclave of the Eastern churches at Etchmiadzin. 45 minutes on the schedule. And guess what? He had read the text that Aaron had brought the book earlier. And he once again said, would you like to work on the material from Constantinople that is here in the depots that Shmiat's in? He was carried away by the words. And to be perfectly honest, you know, as an academic, you say you're right, you do this, you do that, all that junk. Okay, I feel very humbled coming from a man of his stature and status representing the Armenian Church. Because this is exactly what we try to do. We try to present an unbiased approach to let the material culture and the context in which it was created speak for itself, in which everybody will be touched by the sensitivity that these people put in the works that they dedicated to their requisite churches. And he provided us with the commentary. I mean, I wanted to cry, to be honest, because I labored over this. Well, the whole project was 15 years, but I labored over the final proofs of the pages of this volume almost every day for 8 hours when I was not teaching, or when, you know, or at home. I would reread and reread, very much like Toros Rosaline. He painted with pigment on vellum parchment. We paint as scholars, as humanists, whatever, with words. And the task is much harder. To make certain that every word, every sentence, every paragraph conveys the general thought process and spirituality, that the subject matter, that is the objects or the theme that you're dealing with, you convey. And if you don't do that, then you leave out one of the most important things. Everything has a spirituality. This more so because it's in the context of religious culture. And if you leave out that spirituality, as I said with the chalice, and you look at the images on the base and the despondent Christ, you feel the suffering that is narrated by the evangelical writers. Because the artisan captured the brilliance of a despondent person, almost as if giving themselves up in the hopelessness of what was to take place. Not thinking down the road 2.5 days later about the resurrection, but the physical crucifixion. And I have enlarged that piece, and I don't know, my computer and so forth. Whenever I felt down about myself, I'd pull that thing up. Okay? And, you know, it erases all of the petty suffering that we tend to say we're enjoying, the pettiness of academics and so forth, because that was real suffering. And that's what you have to try to capture when you're studying things like this. Okay? Because the pieces can convey an unbelievable spirituality that you have to try to find the words to express. Okay? Because the image alone, I mean, you can have a book of images with no commentary, and it's let the images, you know, attach themselves to each individual, you know, historical event. But you have to try to make some sense out of it too. But that one chalice alone stands out as an unbelievable piece of art. In its composition, its techniques of construction, and what it conveys. The people that made the individual panels and the artisans and so forth, if they were alive today, they would understand what I'm saying, because that's exactly what they try to do. Okay, I mean, you can put the image of Christ in Gethsemane, or, you know, laying on the artifacts of his passion. I think you should be despondent. You know, you're going to have the flail and the cross and this and that and the human suffering. And the person that did the casting of that captured it. And it's still there after 2+ centuries of use. Still being used today. But what I found, as we did at the Holy Cross, in this regard, the people that are taking care of these objects, they didn't even realize that they had this altar ornament, you know, after the descent of the cross, that was dedicated by Haruti and Beji on the year of his death, 1831. They didn't even know it was from Haruti and Bejion. And I doubt very seriously they even knew who he was. And that's what was very sad, because they've come to look at the objects that are used in the liturgy, in the divine liturgy, as just objects. And they fail to realize that those objects that were donated with a tremendous amount of piety by the vast majority of people, not of the higher class, though I'm sure that many of those were pious too, but they tend to talk more about themselves. Okay? They've lost the context. They've lost the attachment. And when you start explaining to them why you're studying, it's like, are you playing with a full deck? You want to study this? You know, this is woman's work. Not to be derogatory, okay? But it's commonplace. But these objects are all consecrated. Don't you understand that? If they're consecrated, they are to live forever because they've been sanctified by the power of the Holy Spirit. So, any questions, please? Yes. No? I talked too much? Yeah, go ahead, yeah. Okay, I mean, no, but the question was, who funded the work that you did? We did not get one karush from the Patriarchate. Not one karush from our Ramakeshian. I have been blessed or cursed with the ability to write good grants. Okay? And from your congregation here that made this book a final volume, an anonymous donor, after a conference was here that Maggie said, please mention, because we were short on the money, came forward and donated a substantial amount. We wanted to put his name in the book, and the person said no. And so we have a dedication to the unknown contributor in the book that made the final and the completion and the publication of this possible. Without the help of that person that spoke for this community, this would not have come out. My university grants, over 15 years, I probably generated close to $100,000. I used all of my own equipment, computers and so forth, for the photography. I received the Zorhab Foundation grant of $35,000, exactly half of what we needed to publish the book. Okay? But we spent multiple years, at least 1 month to 3 months, over 8 years in this part of the project in Istanbul. And we saw the rents going up for the flats that we had. But as I said, you know, in your the answer to the question. I've been blessed with the ability to put in words why this material, or any material, is important to be studied. In the broader context, this is the type of stuff that defines us as human. I was running 2 simultaneous programs, one in Greece in geoarchaeology, which established a new level of expertise in subsurface surveying through ground-piercing radar. We discovered an entire ancient city that no one knew existed. It made the international news. These 2 projects are being run simultaneously. I was constantly writing grants, okay, for the project in Greece and the project in Istanbul. And the university, as well as other agencies and private donations from this community here, made it possible to reach fulfillment, especially this book. It's a long answer. I know it's a long answer. That's just me. I've had students that wanted to raise their hand again, and they pulled it down and said, no, he's on a roll. Okay, so.
I'm going to say this, Ron, sorry. When we were in the Patriarchy in 2013, I was very fortunate that Ron took me to see the basement of the Patriarchy. That used to be the heating system that converted to a museum, and I think Ruben has been there too, haven't you, Ruben? And the Patriarch was upset with me because I have a monk that goes with me, because I was complimenting the work of Ron's work. And he got upset, and he said he didn't have time for me, he had to leave, because I was complimenting Mr. Marquez's work. And they haven't paid a dime for his work. So one of the contributors last time at the conference, he realized that this book is not going to be published, came anonymously and gave me a check so we can complete the book. So thank you for our patrons at the museum. And thank you, Ron, from my heart.
Well, no, I mean, you know, all I can say, without Maggie's enthusiasm and certainly others, yeah, I had problems at the university. If you are a forthright and honest professor and you believe in ideas of free speech, which certainly don't exist in American universities today, the reception I have received, not only from the Armenian community, but those that are ancillary to it on this work and the work in Greece, you know, when you walk away, many times you don't think you really had an impact at all. And then you start to realize in situations like this, that you have done something, you have left something behind, and you feel very humbled. Because, believe it or not, at my age, I'll be 69 next week, I've been retired now for 3 years, and unfortunately you got some of the response, I can't stop talking because I haven't said much to anybody on this stuff in a long time. Okay? You feel humbled. Very humbled. Okay? And I look at myself and I say, okay, I'm still trying to live up to the reputations of my PhD advisors who had faith in my abilities that I was going to achieve something. I still feel honor bound to measure up to their belief in me. And I think that's what is the real driving force for those people that go into the academic world. You're not going to get rich at it, but you may be enriched by the opportunities that are laid before you. But never lose sight of the fact, it's never about you. You are the vehicle that helps explain the heritage of the past. And that should always something. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to pass that around, and then we got going. I mean, we could do that. I mean, you may have, rear end cramps by now. I brought it out here. Okay, we'll be talking about I brought a couple of pieces of embroidery for tomorrow's lecture. That was marketed to me and sold to me in Konya. Came from Bursa, at least that's what they thought it was, where there was a substantial Armenian and Greek Orthodox population. They call it a turban cover. But look at the motif. The size is exactly the size of a chalice cover. And it forms a stylized cross. Now, why would anybody embroider a piece of cloth to place over a frickin' turban? Is it Armenian of heritage? Well, the gold work is. That's gold, real gold, flattened gold. That was a specialty of the Armenian jeweler's trade. They made wire. Thin as a hair, flat wire, various sizes. So, as it says in the Ottoman Defteres, they are by far the best of all the Levantines in the production of silverwork. That's in the early 19th century. From the Ottoman records. And it was recognized certainly also by the Greek Orthodox that the Armenians were the best of the best as artisans in metalwork, including the production of gold and silver wire thread that was used in numerous vestments. So to me, this is a chalice cover. The misinterpretation of vast majorities of objects in modern-day Turkey, ancient Anatolia, is both a conscious and an unconscious method of denying the heritage and the erasure of the cultural heritage of specific groups that were demonized and then exterminated. You killed the practitioners of a culture, and then you killed the culture by giving it an affiliation that is anybody but the ones that you refuse to recognize. Okay? And to me, again, as an archaeologist and deal in material culture and so forth, I've seen this happen in Russia where, Uzbeki carpets become Ukrainian. in the museums. So that's not Ukrainian. Okay? Well, Uzbeks are on the way out. So we don't want to emulate the people that are on the way out. Okay? So you give it to the people that were supposedly you were going to be friends with. Then we'll shoot them and kill them and take their property. Okay? But this happens all over the world. And so here in Anatolia, when you see pieces, textiles or whatever, that are coming on the market, my first Fulbright in 1984, see, it's a long answer, that's my problem. There was a family in Ankara. They would use pickers, but then they would also go out into Cappadocia and elsewhere, and on the weekends, and they go into the old Armenian villages that had been abandoned, and they start digging. And then they would find things. No, not gold and silver, that's all part of the urban legend. They'd find plates. They'd go into the churches that had been desecrated with animal feces and so forth. They would look around and find things. They'd bring them back to Ankara. And they knew that a number of the foreign community were interested in Armenian pieces. And they all had inscriptions on them, on the plates. And they'd pull up the little piece of cloth and say, "Oh, do you want Armenian plates?" And they had stacks of them. Okay, there they knew that what they were selling, but they were selling purely not because of any conscious concern, monetary only. And then those went into private collections. But can you imagine what the inscription said? It resurrects the people of the community. Now I'm going to give you one example. It's a great example. Father Krikor Maksudian, brilliant cleric in the Eastern Diocese, helped us with the inscriptions. Well, one of the inscriptions, actually there's two inscriptions on two large tepsies or tables, copper trays. And he read it, and then he wrote back to me and said, "I didn't think that piece still existed." So I wrote back to him and said, "Well, what do you mean?" He knew who the monk was that controlled the monastery, and he started breaking down the history of the piece based upon the patriarchal records that had survived. And he was absolutely enthralled that this piece, the two pieces, are in the museum, that they had survived. And they come from the area around Tokat, which is near Kayseri, I think. And one of the trays was made by so-and-so of Tokat, but it was made for the monks at the monastery of St. Theodore. And those two trays are actually mentioned in the monasterial documents. And so, like when I said, when you have something of a person that was historically important, like the tomb of Philip II, Alexander's father, this type of stuff, it puts a face on history. When you look at this stuff, I don't see the tapestry. I see the face of the woman behind it, making it. Okay? Because that's what it's all about. And so Father Maksudi and Father Krikor just went on and on and on about the fact that he didn't think that these pieces even survived anymore. They were over 200 years old. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. As I said, the wealth of material that's out there, the sad point is much of that material now that is out there is in private hands. Periodically, they come on the market to be sold. And they do fetch a very high price. But the sad point is, if the people had any type of conscience or ethical standard, they should be going to either the Eastern Diocese or the Western Diocese to give them as donations. Because that's what they were originally used for. They were not to be in the private collections of individuals. Okay? They were not objects of art. They were dedicated to God. There's a little difference here. So, as I said, I could go on about that type of stuff, and then I get too emotional.
Any more questions?
Well, I don't have a question, but I want to thank you for the actually tonight it was more than a lecture, it was a gift. So I really want to thank you for your gift to all of us here.
Oh, at least I wasn't sleep-induced therapy.
I tell you, I've listened to lectures, and tonight I had a breakthrough. I mean, you created a breakthrough
Mhm.
But what your approach is so fantastic. It's you just go vertical and you just go cut it down. So really tonight, I had personally breakthrough towards the approach, what artifacts could really mean.
Mean and tell us, yeah. Well, see, your comment right there only reconfirms the fact that we did achieve something for world culture. Not for, as I said, not, I mean, my reputation was already good and bad was already established. Okay, this was a wonderful opportunity that was sort of a happenstance type situation. Someone comes to you that you've known for years saying, would you be interested in studying this? Oh, that's really kind of interesting. Of course I'm not going to say no because I'm too curious about things. But many people would just say, nah, I have no desire to do that. It's a different part of what it is to be human. Okay, our religious culture and all that type of stuff. So I want to thank you very much for that comment because it means that if I touched any part of your consciousness, then I did achieve something that I really set out to do. Because more often than not in the academic sector, and many of you that are former academicians, okay, or are, in the process of teaching, we only hear about the bad things. We see the bad things when our students fall asleep because you can't instill within them any type of passion for anything, okay? And you lose your enthusiasm. I used to tell my students in class, the very first day of class, you are the ones that make the class as good or as bad as it's going to be. And after 3 weeks, I'll know that it's just a tedious process of carrying the ball. But when you touch upon somebody, and as I said, I use one of the examples, because none of my answers are short, okay? Many of my students knew in years past, his questions are better than the general lecturing, okay? Because you go off on tangents, okay? Because that's what it's a living process. And so I was answering this one question. So the kid was raising the arm, and the guy next to him that asked the first question pulled it down and says, "Don't interrupt. He's on a roll." And I remember that, and I'll never forget that. I'm never going to forget your commentary either, because then you touch something within them, and they are reevaluating so much more. This is only the beginning. I can only hope that, with Richard Ovanasian or Dikran Kumijian or Barlow and at Cal State that are still professors can instill within their students something of this nature is only the beginning. And do not think that if you want to pursue a PhD, it's just going to be rehashing the old stuff. No. You set the standard. You look at what other people have done. We have built upon the research of others within a body of material that even the patriarch himself had no knowledge of. Seriously. The Brothers of St. John's in College Station in St. Cloud, Minnesota, found 545 undocumented illuminated manuscripts in the patriarchate. Yes. That were never even known about. Okay? That's the point, is that many of these places, there is ample opportunity for master's theses, senior paper theses, and PhD dissertations, if you're willing to explore. And all I did on this was to take the proven methodology of archaeological research and apply it not into the context of digging in the earth, but digging in a depot. It's just as rewarding. Okay? You have a stratified level of wonderful objects that are used and not used based upon whatever the demeanor is of the celebrant of the Mass and the clergy. And yes, they were covered in cobwebs, and they were filled with dust, no knowledge of preservation on the textiles. And we know that when they became aware of this, they started to make a conscious effort to preserve those relics of their own past. And we felt very good about that because we provided the stimulus for them to look at the material culture, as you just said, with a higher level of reverence. So I want to thank you all for coming here and being receptive to this. Okay? And hopefully you will go on to talk to your friends and colleagues and kids about the brilliance of Armenian culture. It is more than the genocide genocide has a proper place in human society. Unfortunately, we haven't learned anything from it because 100 years later, it's taking place now in the Middle East. And we have our own administration that don't even want to use the word genocide. Because what, they're going to upset somebody? The destruction of human culture and the destruction of the humans that made it. I just shake my head. What have you learned? You've learned nothing. Making the same mistakes from one generation to the next. It makes me want to cry. For many reasons. Not only this, the death of the innocents, but the erasure of their culture. As if their ancestors had never existed. As if they had made no contributions to that community and that world and civilization. The important point I'm making here is this material is part of human heritage. And it's a brilliant part of human heritage, and that should never be ignored. So thank you. Thank you all.